History tends to remember kings and queens in grandeur, crowned in gold, robed in silk, immortalized in portraits with stoic faces and eyes like marble. But it forgets, or hides, how many of them died like fools. You imagine royalty meeting their end with honor, a final breath on a battlefield, a whispered prayer in a royal bed, perhaps even a symbolic last gesture to their people. But history has other plans. Let's begin with King Adolf Frederick of Sweden. His death, in 1771, was not marked by sword or sickness. It was marked by dessert. He died after consuming a feast that could terrify even the hungriest soul: lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, smoked herring, and champagne. But it was the dessert, 14 servings of semla, a rich pastry swimming in warm milk, that sealed his fate. He ate, and ate, and ate. Then, quietly, his heart stopped. Death by gluttony. A king, felled not by war or rebellion, but by whipped cream. And he's not alone. Somewhere, behind the silk curtains and the golden thrones, royalty has been slipping on rugs, choking on fish bones, falling off chamber pots, and dying in ways too absurd for statues. Consider King Martin of Aragon. In 1410, he died laughing. Yes, literally. After eating an entire goose. He was lying in bed with indigestion when his jester arrived. The jester cracked a joke so unexpectedly absurd that the king burst into laughter, and never stopped. A royal death by hilarity. His last words? Something about a joke involving a girl, a fig, and a donkey. The punchline is lost. The king is not. Then there's King George II of Great Britain. He died in 1760. On the toilet. The cause was an aortic aneurysm. But the location? Undignified. His servants found him slumped over in the royal water closet. A man who ruled an empire. Found lifeless on the porcelain throne. The newspapers at the time were gentle. But the palace whispers? Less so. Death, in all its forms, makes fools of us. But when it comes for a crown, it rarely knocks politely. King Alexander of Greece met his end because of a monkey. Yes, a monkey. In 1920, while walking in the royal gardens, one of his dogs got into a scuffle with a macaque. When Alexander tried to break up the fight, the monkey bit him. The wound seemed minor, but infection set in. He died weeks later from sepsis. A monarch, lost to a monkey bite. His death changed the course of Greek history, plunging the country into political chaos. All because of one very angry primate. But perhaps none of these compared to the death of Sigurd the Mighty, an Earl of Orkney in the 9th century. After a victorious battle, he strapped the severed head of his enemy to his saddle as a trophy. As he rode home, the head's teeth scraped his leg. The wound grew infected. He died days later, killed by the dental revenge of a dead man. Irony doesn't get sharper than that. Even emperors are not immune to absurdity. Take Emperor Elagabalus of Rome, famous for decadence and chaos. His reign was filled with scandal. But his death? Brutal and humiliating. Betrayed by his own guards. He was dragged through the streets, beheaded, and his body was thrown into the Tiber River. Yet, what truly sticks isn't just the violence, it's that the people cheered. Glad to be rid of a ruler who reportedly tried to appoint a lover as co-emperor and invited goats to official feasts. Then there was Charles VIII of France. His reign had been full of ambition and failure. But his end came suddenly, and stupidly. In 1498, while walking down a dark corridor to watch a tennis match, he struck his head on a low doorway. He collapsed. Hours later, he was dead. A king, conquered not by enemy swords, but by a poorly placed lintel. Not all royal deaths are violent. Some are just strange. Take Queen Caroline of Ansbach, wife of George II. In 1737, she developed a strangulated hernia. The king refused surgery. She's strong, he said. She'll be fine. She was not. She died in agony, while her husband, too proud to accept medical advice, stood nearby. Helpless. Sometimes, pride kills more surely than any disease. And while we're on the subject of royal medical disasters, let's not forget King Charles II of Navarre, known as Charles the Bad. In his final illness, doctors wrapped him in brandy-soaked cloth as a treatment. A careless nurse came too close with a candle. He went up in flames. Burned alive by his own cure. A king, flambéed by incompetence. The more you look, the more absurd it becomes. Royalty, cloaked in ceremony. protected by guards, buried beneath marble, died of the same things that take us all. Accidents, misjudgments, foolishness. Some simply had the misfortune of doing so in ways so dramatic, so ridiculous, that history couldn't look away. But there's something strangely comforting in that. To know that kings choked on melons, that queens died of tooth infections, that emperors slipped on wet steps or trusted the wrong doctor or ate too many pastries. It strips away the myth. It makes them human. It reminds us that no matter how many jewels you wear, you're still made of the same fragile skin, the same stubborn heart, the same breath that can vanish between one bite and the next. And in the quiet of night, as your eyes grow heavier, as the weight of centuries begins to press softly into your chest, you realize something simple. Royalty may have ruled nations, but not even they could outwit death, especially when death decided to be funny. So breathe deeply. Let the absurdity of history wrap around you like velvet. Close your eyes and drift, because there are more stories to tell, and some of them are even stranger than this. But we'll get to those soon. Embarrassment doesn't care if you wear a crown. In fact, it seems to prefer it. Because when kings fall, they fall harder. And when they die in ridiculous ways, history remembers with a smirk. Let's wander further into this royal theater of the absurd. Deeper into corridors where gold-plated dignity slips on spilled wine and breaks its neck on a joke gone wrong. Meet Belai of Hungary. In 1063, he sat on a wooden throne. That's normal. What's not normal is that the throne collapsed beneath him. He suffered serious injuries and died shortly after. Not from battle, not from poison, from furniture failure. A king, literally crushed by his own seat of power. You can almost hear the court musicians pausing mid-note. Then there's the bizarre case of King Edmund Ironside, ruler of England in the early 11th century. Some say he died of natural causes. Others whisper a darker tale, that he was stabbed with a dagger while using the toilet. From beneath, through the seat, the assassin hid in the cesspit, patient, silent, waiting. If true, it's the kind of royal death that sounds too ridiculous to believe, but just believable enough to haunt you. To die on a battlefield is one thing. To die on the loo? Quite another. But even more peculiar is the death of Louis III of France. In 882, while chasing a girl who had rejected him, on horseback, he hit his head on a doorframe and died instantly. A young king, full of pride and hormones, brought down not by enemy steel but by romantic rejection and poor clearance. And speaking of romantic disasters, let's talk about King Henry I of England. In 1135, he died after eating a surfeit of lampreys. That's a fancy way of saying he ate too many eels. His doctors warned him against it. He ignored them. He loved lampreys, so he kept eating, until his body said no. A king, taken down by seafood. And yet, it didn't end there. His death sparked a massive succession crisis. Civil war, years of chaos, all because a man couldn't say no to dinner. In royal circles, gluttony was often as dangerous as treason. Consider Philip of France, son of King Louis VI. In 1131, he was riding through Paris when his horse tripped over a pig. Yes, a pig. It darted into the street, as pigs often did in those days. Philip was thrown. His head struck the pavement. He died from the impact. A future king, dethroned by livestock. Sometimes, it wasn't the death that was embarrassing, but what happened after. Take Pope Adrian IV, the only English pope in history. He died in 1159 after choking on a fly. More accurately, a fly reportedly flew into his mouth while he was drinking wine. The exact details remain unclear, but if true, it's possibly the most undignified end for a man who claimed divine authority. Flies, pigs, pastries, chairs, death, it seems, had a taste for irony. But not all embarrassing ends were quick. Some were slow, cruel, surreal, like the final days of Emperor Valentinian II. He ruled a crumbling Western Roman Empire. Young, unsteady, a puppet for generals. In 392 AD, he was found hanged in his palace. Officially, it was suicide, and officially, many suspect murder. But here's the twist. His body was treated with such indifference that it was left unburied for weeks. Moved from city to city, becoming a political prop. The indignity wasn't just in how he died. It was in how little anyone cared. And then there's Emperor Justin II. In the 6th century, he lost his mind, literally. Historians say he would bite servants, scream without cause, and be carried around the palace in a cart like a child. One report claims he found comfort in biting his own furniture. The emperor, ruler of a vast and ancient empire, gnawed on bedposts to soothe himself. His reign ended not with blood, but with madness, the kind that erodes dignity piece by piece until nothing remains. Yet somehow, history keeps those memories intact. Because people remember the madness more than the laws, the laughter more than the policies, the fall more than the crown. And if you think all this is limited to the deep past, think again. Take the case of King Albert I of Belgium, a respected monarch, brave and beloved, but in 1934, he went mountain climbing alone and fell to his death. An accident, certainly, but royals weren't supposed to climb cliffs without guards or guides. His body lay crumpled at the base of a cliff. Newspapers softened the story, but in private, the nobility whispered. What was he thinking? Then there was Tsar Alexander I of Russia. He died in 1825 under mysterious circumstances during a trip to Taganrog. But rumors swirled that he faked his death and became a wandering monk named Fyodor Kuzmich. Some said they saw him. Others believed it. The Tsar, they claimed, had fled the crown and chosen silence. A royal ghost story, half tragedy, half farce. Even in death, some kings can't stop performing. And what about Queen Sunanda Kumariratana of Siam? In 1880, her boat capsized in front of many people. But no one helped her. Why? Because royal law forbade touching the queen. They watched her drown, afraid that saving her would mean their own execution. A queen, perishing within arm's reach of help, killed by her own throne's laws. It's not always murder or food or madness. Sometimes, it's bureaucracy, a slow, absurd, deadly thing. And now, as you lie there in the dark, eyes soft, breath slower, let this truth settle over you like an old velvet curtain. Royalty is not immunity. It's theater. You wear the crown, yes, but you also risk dying in front of everyone, with a pie in your face or a sword in your back. Or worse, both. So sleep now. Dream of thrones made of porcelain, of battles fought with spoons, of courts ruled by ducks and poets and jesters who laugh too loud. Because history, when no one's watching, is a comedy. And kings? Kings are its best punchline. But we're not done yet. There are more deaths to uncover. More moments where power met absurdity and lost. We'll continue soon. For now, just rest. They say heavy is the head that wears the crown. But sometimes, it's just clumsy, or unlucky, or deeply, profoundly ridiculous. You've already heard about kings who died from deserts and queens who drowned in front of silent crowds. But history, ever the mischief maker, has plenty more royal exits that boggle the mind and bruise the ego. Let's travel to Denmark. King Hans, also known as John, ruled Denmark, Norway, and Sweden during the late 15th century. He was trying to strengthen his grip on power when he decided to impress a crowd by showing his physical prowess. His challenge? A riding stunt. Something simple, perhaps heroic, but his horse stumbled. The king fell. He never fully recovered from the injuries and died a few months later. A king, undone by his own theatrical instincts. In royal history, appearances were everything, but sometimes, in trying to look powerful, monarchs revealed just how breakable they really were. Like King Charles XII of Sweden, a warrior king, bold in battle, feared by enemies. In 1718, during a siege in Norway, he was inspecting trenches when a mysterious projectile struck his head, killing him instantly. Some say it was enemy fire. Others claim it was his own men. The truth? Still debated, but either way, the image is the same, a powerful king, head blown open under the stars, in a trench full of wet earth and freezing silence. Dignity didn't show up that night. But some royal deaths are so tangled in rumor, so soaked in absurdity, that no one knows what's true anymore. Consider Emperor Nero of Rome. He ruled with flair, if flair means paranoia, artistic delusions, and public murders. When his reign collapsed, he fled, cornered, with enemies approaching. He attempted to stab himself but failed. A loyal servant helped him finish the job. Even in death, Nero needed applause. His last words? What an artist dies in me. History may remember his crimes. But it also remembers the irony. A tyrant who wanted to be loved, and died hated. In hiding, half-botched, barely noble. Further east, we meet Qin Shi, the second emperor of China's Qin dynasty. He inherited an empire from his father, the legendary Qin Shi Huang. But instead of ruling wisely, he hid in the palace, terrified of ghosts and omens. His ministers controlled everything. He was a puppet. When rebellion came, he tried to flee, but was caught. Forced to commit suicide. A boy emperor, swallowed by shadows, remembered less for what he did and more for what he feared. Fear, it seems, is a frequent companion of royalty. Just ask Emperor Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, born into the peak of Roman power. He fancied himself a gladiator. He fought in the arena. He dressed like Hercules. He made statues of himself with lion skins and clubs. But behind the muscles and megalomania was a fragile ruler. Eventually, he was poisoned by a mistress. And when the poison didn't work fast enough, strangled in his bath by a wrestler. It's dramatic, the kind of ending that suits a play. But not a history book. And definitely not a throne. Then there was King Sebastian of Portugal. In 1578, he led a disastrous campaign in Morocco. His army was annihilated. He vanished in battle, never confirmed dead, never found. The nation mourned. But then, rumors began. That he had survived, that he was wandering, disguised, that he would return. For centuries, people claimed to see him, an echo that refused to fade. They called it Sebastianism, a whole nation haunted by a king who may have died chasing glory, or may have run from it. But some royal deaths didn't just break dignity. They broke the world around them. Like Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. In 1918, he and his family were taken into a basement by revolutionaries. No throne, no crown, just concrete walls and harsh lights. They were told to pose for a photograph. Then bullets, chaos, blood, a dynasty erased in a moment. The Romanovs had ruled for 3 centuries. But in the end, they were lined up and gunned down like fugitives. No last speech, no royal farewell, only silence and a basement stained by history. And sometimes, the death isn't what's ridiculous. It's the life before it. Take Ludwig II of Bavaria. The Mad King. The dreamer. The man who built castles like Neuschwanstein, spires rising like fairy tales above the mist. He spent money wildly, avoided politics, loved opera more than ruling. Eventually, his ministers declared him insane. He was arrested. Days later, he was found dead in a lake. No explanation, no witnesses. A king who drowned in his own legend. But among all these tales, there's something universal, a thread beneath the gold and velvet and myth. Royalty is still just people. People who fall off horses. People who choke on grapes. People who laugh too hard at bad jokes and die from it. They're surrounded by ceremony and power and pageantry, but inside, the same fragile body beats. The same doubts. The same foolishness. And that's what makes these stories so quietly powerful. They remind us that even the highest towers are built on human error. So now, as your eyes begin to close, and your mind floats somewhere between lampreys and poisoned emperors, let the absurdity become soft. Let the laughter of centuries fade into whispers. There are more names, of course. More kings who slipped. More queens who coughed once too hard and never got up again. But they can wait. For now, you rest. History, after all, isn't in a hurry. And neither is death. Especially not when it has such a sense of humor. You would think, after a while, royalty might learn not to ride alone. Not to eat a third helping. Not to invite jesters into their sickbeds or carry severed heads too close to their thighs. But no, royalty, throughout the ages, kept dying in ways that sound like poorly written comedy skits. And history, ever loyal, keeps the stories alive, so we can laugh quietly centuries later. As we drift into sleep, let's start this time with King James II of Scotland. In 1460, during the siege of Roxburgh Castle, he was overseeing the battle with pride. Confident, brave, even theatrical. But the Scots had recently acquired a fancy new cannon, called the Lion. And like most early cannons, it was a temperamental beast. One misfire, one crack in the barrel, and the entire thing exploded. King James II was standing too close. Shrapnel tore through his thigh, nearly severing it. He died within minutes. A king, not felled by enemy swords, but by his own side's eagerness to show off. Then we have the tragic absurdity of Archduchess Matilda of Austria. In 1867, she was 18 years old, young and vibrant. One day, she was preparing to go out when someone reminded her that smoking was forbidden. In a panic, she tried to hide the lit cigarette behind her back. Her dress was made of highly flammable tulle. It caught fire. She burned alive. The horror, the waste, the senselessness, all because of a moment of fear and fabric that was too fashionable for safety. And while we're in Austria, let's not forget Emperor Maximilian I. His death wasn't particularly embarrassing. He died of illness in 1519. But what happened after? Now that's the strange part. Maximilian had a fear of being buried alive. So he made very specific, very graphic funeral requests. That his body be whipped after death. Yes, whipped, just to make sure he was actually dead. And then, cut apart. He wanted his heart sent to one location, his bones to another, and his flesh boiled off entirely. The man ruled half of Europe. But in death, he wanted to be punished. Just to be sure. Then there was King Charles VI of France, also known as Charles the Mad. He once believed he was made of glass. Yes, glass. He wore reinforced clothing and refused to be touched. At one point, he ran through a forest naked, howling at trees. Another time, he killed 4 of his own knights during a fit of paranoia. He didn't die in some spectacular public collapse. He simply faded, a king who ruled a kingdom, but lost the war inside his own mind. And what about more recent monarchs? Let's talk about King Farouk of Egypt. He ruled until 1952, when he was overthrown and exiled. His habits were infamous. He was known to overeat, collect rare items, and hoard things like soap and combs. After losing his throne, he moved to Italy and continued to live lavishly. He died in 1965. At dinner, after a massive meal of oysters, foie gras, lobster, roast lamb, and fruit, witnesses say he stood up, proclaimed he was full, and then collapsed face first into his plate. A king, done in by one last indulgence. Some monarchs die in war, some by betrayal, and some simply overestimate their stomachs. There's a strange vulnerability in these stories. These were people taught from birth to hide weakness, to perform strength, and yet, when the final curtain falls, it's rarely on a battlefield or in a grand speech. It's in a dining room, or a bathtub, or a dark hallway with a pig running loose. And sometimes, the final act isn't even theirs. Consider the strange fate of King Ludwig III of Bavaria. After losing his throne in the aftermath of World War I, he went into exile. But years later, in 1921, he returned to visit family. He caught a cold. It turned into pneumonia. He died quietly. No crown, no army, no titles. Just an old man, coughing in a guest room. Or Queen Anne of Great Britain. She endured 17 pregnancies. 17. Only one child survived infancy, and he died at age 11. Her reign was filled with sorrow. Her body plagued by illness. Her spirit dulled by grief. She died in 1714. Bloated, exhausted, alone, not in disgrace, not in humiliation, but in profound sadness. And maybe, in its own way, that's the most human and most crushing of ends. Because some royal deaths aren't ridiculous. They're just terribly, heartbreakingly ordinary. No explosions, no flaming dresses. Just the slow collapse of someone who was supposed to live forever. But perhaps the most poignant story of all belongs to no one. We don't know the name of the first king who slipped on wet stone and broke his neck. Or the first queen who drank a bit too much and fell asleep in the cold. Those stories are lost, but they happened. They always happen. Because death doesn't care for bloodlines, or titles, or portraits hanging in echoing halls. It comes with a cough, a sneeze, a trip on a stair. And for kings and queens, that's the greatest embarrassment of all, to die not as a symbol, but as a body, fallible, frail, forgettable. So as you lie there, sinking deeper into the softness of your bed, your mind drifting like fog over ancient ruins, let the absurdity wash over you. Not to mock, but to comfort. Even those born to rule are ruled. In the end, by the same fragile fate as the rest of us. No crown can stop it. No throne can rise above it. It's just a matter of when. And how ridiculous the ending might be. There's more, of course. More kings who choked. More queens who vanished. More rulers who, in their final moments, forgot how powerful they were supposed to be. But those stories can wait. For now, close your eyes. Breathe in the silence of centuries. And rest, knowing you've already outlived half the monarchs in this story. That's something worth dreaming about. By now, you've noticed a pattern. The crown glitters. The robes swirl. The titles echo. And still, they slip. They choke. They fall. Sometimes in front of hundreds. Sometimes alone. Royalty was never a guarantee of grace. Only a spotlight. And when the spotlight lingers long enough, even the strongest stumble in absurd, unscripted ways. Let's go back further. To ancient times. To the tale of Draco. The first recorded lawgiver of Athens. Not technically a king, but revered like one. His death was almost theatrical. Fitting for a man whose laws were so harsh that draconian became a word. He was giving a speech at a theater. The crowd adored him, and in the Athenian tradition, they showed their admiration by throwing gifts, cloaks, hats, robes, so many robes, piled high, one after another. They smothered him. Draco, the lawmaker, was loved to death by fabric. Royal deaths don't always come from blades or betrayals. Sometimes, they come from applause, or silk. Then there's the haunting death of Pyrrhus of Epirus, the man who gave us the phrase, Pyrrhic victory. After years of war, he met his end not on the battlefield, but in the streets of Argos. As he was engaged in hand-to-hand combat, an old woman, watching from a rooftop, threw a tile. It struck his head. He stumbled, and was killed by a foot soldier seconds later. Not by an army, not by a rival king, by a falling roof tile. And an elderly hand grown tired of war. The grandest of legacies, ended by the smallest of gestures. Then there's the story of Emperor Caracalla of Rome. He was riding along a road, having stopped to relieve himself in the bushes because, well, nature calls even emperors. While he was occupied, a disgruntled soldier took the opportunity and stabbed him from behind. A brutal death, yes, but the embarrassment? That Rome's most powerful man died with his trousers down. Some monarchs die for causes. Others die for nothing at all. But a special few, like Caracalla, die for everything and nothing. All at once. Their ends are tragic, but oddly comedic in timing. And while we speak of Romans, let's not forget the odd passing of Emperor Julian the Apostate. During a campaign in Persia, he was struck by a spear, possibly thrown by one of his own men. As he bled out, he reportedly said, "You have won, Galilean," referring to Christ, whom he had rejected. A philosophical exit, if true, but just as likely, that he was cursing in pain, trying to hold in his intestines with one hand and meaning nothing poetic at all. Because even emperors don't always get the last word. Some monarchs meet death not with irony, but with defiance. But that doesn't make their endings any less bizarre. Take King Harold II of England. He died at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. The famous story is that he was struck in the eye with an arrow. A clean, sharp image, iconic, but historians now argue over it. Was it really the eye? Or was he hacked to pieces by Norman swords? Or both? There's even a legend that he survived, escaped, and became a monk. So which version do we tell? The dramatic one? The humiliating one? Or the secret, hidden away in peace one? Maybe all three are true. In their own way. Because death, especially royal death, is more about the story than the certainty. We remember how they might have died, not how they actually did. And some stories are simply strange. King William II of England, known as William Rufus, was shot with an arrow during a hunting trip. The official story says it was an accident, but the archer who shot him fled. Never explained, never returned. Suspicious. But the real absurdity? That the king's body was left lying in the woods for hours. No ceremony, no dignity, just sprawled on the forest floor while his companions returned to court to discuss the succession. He died surrounded by nature, and was treated like nothing more than meat in red velvet. History doesn't always offer kindness, even to kings. Then there's Philip the Fair of France. A powerful, calculating monarch. He arrested the Knights Templar. He clashed with the Pope. He was feared and respected. But his death? He fell from a horse. That was it. No assassin. No illness. Just a misstep. A stumble. And a world left wondering how such a brutal ruler could be undone by something so mundane. It's almost as if the world has a sense of humor. A dark one. And then, we find King Albert of Saxony. In 1902, he was struck by a car, one of the earliest monarchs to be killed in an automobile accident. Not war. Not politics. Just traffic. A man born in castles. Buried because of a new machine rolling down cobbled streets. By now, you've seen it clearly. The higher the throne, the harder and stranger the fall. But these deaths, odd and ridiculous as they are, offer something unexpected. Relief. Relief that even the most powerful are not invincible. That they are just as clumsy. Just as foolish. Just as fragile as we are. And in that realization lies comfort. Because the next time you trip, or spill, or embarrass yourself, remember, kings did worse. They slipped on pigs. They choked on fish. They forgot their armor, their dignity, their final words. And still, the world went on. So as you exhale, body sinking deeper into rest, let the stories settle around you like dust in an ancient hall. They ruled empires, and still died like punchlines. That's history. It forgets no one, and forgives no one, either. But you, here, in this soft quiet moment, you are safe. And maybe, for once, a little wiser. There's one more chapter to tell. One more passage to read. But for now, just breathe. We'll finish the final stories soon. So here we are. The final chapter. The last candle flickering in the grand hall of royal absurdity. You've walked through palaces and pigpens. You've seen kings fall from horses. Queens set aflame by fashion. Emperors bitten by monkeys. And rulers undone by laughter. Pies. And plumbing. And maybe you're wondering, why does it matter? Why tell these stories at all? Because behind the absurdity is something honest. Something soft. A reminder that even the people etched into coins, carved into marble, and sung about in hymns, were, at their core, just as breakable as the rest of us. Their crowns were real, yes, but so were their coughs, their clumsiness, their strange final moments when nothing, not power, not prayer, not prestige, could protect them from being human. Let's walk slowly now, toward the final few, to the story of King Wenceslaus III of Bohemia. He was young, just 16 when crowned. In 1306, he was murdered, stabbed in the back while lying in bed. No guards saved him, no one was punished, and his reign ended not in fanfare but in silence. His death ended his dynasty. One blade, one boy, one moment history barely noticed. Then there was the last emperor of China, Puyi. Born in palaces of gold. He wore the dragon robes before he could read. But his reign ended early. And his life became stranger than fiction. He worked as a gardener under communist rule. The once son of heaven. Pruning plants in a gray uniform. Unseen by the world he once ruled. He died in 1967. In a small Beijing apartment. No throne, no crown, just a man in slippers. History doesn't always end with trumpets. Sometimes it just fades. And what about Håkon the Good? King of Norway? He died from wounds sustained in battle. Noble, yes, but here's the twist, he was mortally wounded in a victory. He won, but bled out anyway, and on his deathbed, he asked to be buried with pagan rites. Despite being Christian, even in dying, kings could not quite decide who they were, or which gods to take with them. Some kings died surrounded by whispers, others, by laughter, like King Stanislaw Leszczynski of Poland. At age 88, he leaned too close to a fireplace in his dressing gown. The fabric caught fire. He burned slowly. A former king, once at the heart of European diplomacy, left screaming in a sitting room, flames licking his robes. Even fire doesn't care for titles. And now, perhaps the quietest one of all, Edward V of England. A boy king, crowned, then vanished, locked in the Tower of London with his younger brother. They were never seen again. The mystery remains. Were they murdered? Smuggled out? Forgotten? No one knows. They left no last words. Only echoes. The most embarrassing royal deaths aren't always loud. Sometimes, they're a question no one wants to answer. Sometimes, There a throne left empty. But as you drift now, safe in your bed, let this strange parade of endings become soft again. You've seen enough. You've felt the gold slip, the banners fall, the velvet unravel. You've watched power dissolve under the weight of wine, wild animals, and wrong timing. And yet, there's something oddly reassuring in all of this. Because if even kings and queens can fall on their faces, then maybe you don't have to be perfect either. Maybe it's okay to make mistakes. To trip, to laugh at the wrong time, to spill the soup, to miss the mark. You're not here to be remembered and marble. You're here to live, to try, to stumble and stand and sleep. Royalty spent centuries pretending they were above the rest of us. But their deaths tell another story. A truer one, a messier one, a more human one. And in that, there is peace. There is comfort. So let the stories go now. Let the kings rest in their cracked thrones. Let the queens sleep beneath their scorched lace. Let the emperors stop performing. They've all had their turn. And so have you. Close your eyes. Breathe deep. The weight of history is heavy. But tonight, it's soft. Like candle smoke. Like fallen leaves. Like the memory of a crown, long since buried beneath the dust. Good night.